All right, Razorback fans, you know that Arkansas lost their regional. They hosted in Fayetteville once again, but it didn't matter because they lost for the second year in a row. Their season ended in Fayetteville way too soon, and it came by the hands of SEMO. For those of you who don't understand what that stands for, it's Southeast Missouri State, 6-3. Now, there are a lot of reasons why Arkansas did not perform really well here in this regional, and we can go through them all and discussing about who to blame and everything. But the problem is that it simply comes down to this: timely hitting. That's it. Timely hitting. This was the problem that Arkansas has really had all season, and honestly, folks, it's been a problem that they've had over the past few years. I know that it's simple to just look at it that way, but when it comes to the place like Arkansas, are you going to be perfect every year? No, but you should never be one of the worst teams in the SEC in anything, ever, at all. The University of Arkansas baseball team every single year should never be ranked in the double digits in the conference in any major statistical category, but over the past few years, especially when it comes to the most important parts of hitting, they have been featured in the bottom of the barrel, in the bottom four of the conference. Unacceptable, shouldn't happen, and it's frustrating that we continue to talk about this and continue to try to make sense out of it, continue to try to make excuses for whoever. It doesn't matter. But the Razorback baseball team has to make some changes here this offseason. You cannot continue to have this type of performance in postseason. It is awesome that Arkansas was able to go out and win the SEC West. It's great that they won 20 SEC games once again. It's great that they had a great regular season where they were good enough to be a national seed. That's all great, but that's not what counts. That's not what's going to be remembered. Folks, the only thing that you can think back and just look at the past few years, ever since that COVID thing ended the season back in 2020. Every single year, you've had a great year. You've had a solid year in the regular season, but only one time have you actually made the College World Series, and it was the one time when you did not host a regional because you were not a national seed, because your regular season was not all that great, comparatively speaking. What are you going to remember about the 2021 season? Kevin Kopps, for sure, but you're also going to remember that you fell short. What are you going to remember about the 2023 season? You had a lot of injuries, but you fell short. And what are you going to remember about this past year? You just fell short. You just fell short. You may remember some of the things that Hagen Smith did, but you fell short. That's what people are going to remember. Not the positives, but the negatives. That's just the way it is. But a lot of this comes down to Nate Thompson. Nate Thompson, who's been the hitting coach for quite a few years, who actually replaced Tony Vitello as the hitting coach at Arkansas. He has been under a lot of fire, a lot of scrutiny. Dave Van Horn talked to the media yesterday and was discussing how he felt about Nate Thompson and the job he does.
Future, you mentioned the up and down nature of the offense all year. Would you consider like a philosophical change with the offense, and how confident are you that Coach Thompson can lead it to turn around?
He's ate up with the offense and analytics, and he really tries to train a swing. He does a great job. Probably no one works harder than him at it. You can always make adjustments, and a lot of times I think what you're talking about is maybe a little bit more of an approach. Really, in my opinion, that's always important to do that. But we got to get a little better athlete. We can't just have 8 guys that hit homers. I like guys that hit doubles, and I like guys that hit homers, but you got to have some guys that can run too, and you got to be able to create some offense the days the wind's blowing in or they're really good on the mound and you're having trouble making contact. And that's something that we want to do, and we're trying to get the right players. The 4 guys that we lost last year that were high school kids, those kids could all really run and they could hit and play. And it kind of devastated us a little bit. It threw us back. And so, always looking to get better. And
all right, so that's enough. Like Dave Van Horn, I'm going to make this clear. Like, I'm not discrediting what Dave Van Horn is saying. I am not saying that he needs to be fired, because there may be some idiots out there that say that, and you're just that, an idiot. Dave Van Horn does not need to be fired. You're a moron if you think that. But that doesn't mean Dave Van Horn doesn't need to make adjustments. Doesn't mean that Dave Van Horn doesn't need to make changes. And he talked about it a little bit, and I think both things can be true at once. If Nate Thompson stays on at staff, that's not going to inspire any hope for anybody. I mean, just be honest with yourself as a Razorback Baseball fan. If you find out that Nate Thompson is staying on for another year, how are you going to feel about that? Probably not very good. Probably not very inspired. Just being honest, because you're going to be in wait and see mode. Be like, okay, well, if you're going to keep him on, you got to change something else. And that's kind of what Dave Van Horn talked about right there. He went into what they'd be specifically looking at and changing, whether it be the philosophy, getting the athletes out there, whatever it is. But I want to give credit where credit is due to Dave. He gets it that there is some things that they need to change. There are some things that they have to do. Not that they need, they have to. They have to change if they want to be able to compete for a College World Series title. And the offense has got to be the biggest key component to this. Pitching is not always going to be perfect, but pitching is not why Arkansas struggled this year. Pitching was not an issue. If Arkansas was just middle of the pack in the SEC this year in hitting, folks, they may have won 56 games. Like, it's incredible thinking how poor that their hitting overall has been. And when it comes to not only just the batting average, but thinking about how many times they left runners in scoring position and runners left on base, you take all of those factors into one and you start putting it together like, holy crap, how did this team win the SEC West? Similar to what last year was. How did that team win in the SEC West with the amount of injuries that they have? There's a great core. There's a great culture. There's a great philosophy in the approach to the game of baseball that Dave Van Horn has built and instilled into his program. But now it's about making that little tweak to get you back to that next point, into that next level. Arkansas has had success, but that doesn't mean that you got to keep going back to the well, be like, well, it worked for us before, so let's just keep on doing it. No, Dave understands that there is some things that there's going to have to adjust. And I think two things can be true. You can say that if Nate Thompson ends up moving on or ends up leaving or anything, that can ultimately be a positive for Arkansas. But also you can look at it where if you're truly all about what you're saying, Dave, Coach Van Horn, I won't call him Dave, don't even tell at me. But if you're truly serious about making those adjustments and making those changes, then okay. But it's about keeping Nate Thompson. Okay. But people are going to want to see that. You're talking about the athletes and the athletes themselves. Okay, great. So what are the athletes going to do for you? You know, what approach are you going to have that is going to make this team and this offense work? Well, I think there are some things that we can talk about specifically with the offense and specifically with some of the things that they can adjust here during the offseason. But before we do that, I'm really excited to announce and to promote our newest partner here at Natty State Sports. It is Hopper, Termite, and Pest. It is that time of year, folks, when the weather gets a little bit warmer. They're not called pets for nothing. Like critters, like rodents, roaches, mosquitoes, they can destroy your property, and they can also create health problems for your family, which, who wants that? Not me. But thankfully, for all of you, Hopper, Termite, and Pest Incorporated has a true solution for all of your issues. It's the pest control program that eradicates most common pests and works for many weeks before it is need to be reapplied. It even lasts through the rain. So you can check them out today and get that done, not only just for your house and your residential, but also for your businesses, any place in the not only Northwest Arkansas area, but also the North Central Arkansas area. They got places all across the state. And you can find out more by just visiting the website at www.callhopper.com. That's CALLHOPPER.com. Or you can call them today, 479-750-4070. And the best part about it is if you use promo code Natty, Natty, promo code Natty, you get $50 off your first treatment. So check them out today. It is Hopper, Termite, and Pest right here in the state of Arkansas. Get those pests out of your house, because no one wants that. And do it with Hopper, Termite, and Pest. So how does Arkansas and Nate Thompson, offense, Dave Van Horn, everybody involved, make this work? And when you're talking about athletes? Well, here's kind of what Dave was. Man, can you call him Dave? Coach Van Horn. Coach. DVH. Skip. Whatever. Here's what you do. When you get the athletes, you've got to be able to maybe do some small ball. I remember people complain about small ball all the time, and I was one of those people because it didn't ever seem very effective. But you can tell that there's times this year where small ball would have been extremely effective, especially when you're having trouble getting guys to score in those scoring positions, to advance some runners. And Arkansas tried to do some of the bunting, but they just didn't have the speed to be able to beat out some of those throws, to be able to take advantage of it. I mean, I even saw this past weekend in the regional, they weren't necessarily bunts, but they were little, short hits and went into the infield that could have been almost classified as a bunt. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, they got this. And then they get thrown out pretty easily. Sometimes it was great play made by the infield and the defense, but other times it's just Arkansas just did not have that top end speed that they needed to have. So you got to have some of those guys that can also not only do that, but can steal bases to advance the runner there. Arkansas on occasion stole bases, but didn't really have that next level deal. But that will be helpful. It absolutely will be helpful. So I don't want to make and pretend like that has nothing to do with anything. But still, though, at the end of the day, it has to stop when Arkansas has runners at second and third with no outs and no one scores. Or runners at the corners with one out and no one scores. That has to stop. And I'm not sitting here trying to say, like, I know exactly how to fix it. It's like, yeah, you just do this with your bat, and then there it goes. Like, no, it's a coaching thing that you got to develop and you got to maintain, but that has to change. I mean, folks, I cannot tell you how many times this year it happened. Like, maybe one of these baseball statistical crazies can go in there and really dive into how many times Arkansas left a man at third base, at least at third base, with less than 2 outs. I am sure it's an inordinate amount. And those were the things that made differences many times in these games, which is still an incredible thing to think about considering how great of a record Arkansas had. Still frustrating, not making excuses. But there's got to be a way to adjust that, to fix that, to make it better. And if it's just simply getting better athletes, so be it. But you can't just continue to have what happens. And what the scary thing about it is too, folks, is that you have a lot of turnover, which we know in sports and in college baseball, especially, and with Dave Van Horn, he's had a lot of turnover. But think about some of the players you're going to be losing out on. Guys that have been extremely pivotal to not only this year's team, but guys that have run out of eligibility. I mean, you're talking about Peyton Stovall. Peyton Stovall's moving on. Hudson White's going to be moving on. You got Ben McLaughlin who's going to be moving on. Kendall Diggs is going to be moving on. Think about Parker Rowland, Peyton Holt, Wilmsmeyer. Throw in, and that's not even the pitchers. We got a guy named Hagen Smith. I don't know if you guys heard about him. Yeah, he's moving on. Will McIntyre is going to be moving on. Cody Frank's going to be moving on. And I mean, that's just to name a few. I don't think I missed anybody, and I don't think I named anybody that might actually still have a chance to come back. Well, some of them do, but my point is that's still an inordinate amount of guys, and Arkansas will do just fine. They always have in recruiting. They'll do great in the transfer portal. They'll get guys in. That'll be extremely helpful. But you got to establish and you got to get that problem in the philosophy figured out first. Because there were players this year, folks, that came from other places. Like, for instance, Wilmsmeyer might be the craziest example of it. Wilmsmeyer was a guy that at Missouri, which the reason I use him as the example is because, unfortunately, Missouri has to play Arkansas every year in every sport, is number one. But also, two, unfortunately, Missouri is in the SEC. But they went up against similar opponents. Okay. So what does that mean? You're probably wondering. It's like, okay, what does that give you? Well, here's the deal. Ty Wilmsmeyer was a guy that hit like 300, 311 even at Missouri. And this year he hit 179. That was his conference game statistics. 179. Kendall Diggs struggled so much this year, and I hate it for him because he's such a great kid, and he comes from a great family. But his batting average went down 60 points this year from last year. That's the stuff that's just going to want to pull your hair out, and you're trying to figure out why. Why is this the case? It's easy to critique. It's easy to complain. It's easy to do all these things whenever the season's now officially come to an end and it didn't go the way that you wanted. But I've talked to a lot of former players of Coach Van Horn, former players that played at Arkansas over the past few seasons, and everything. And one thing that I feel like there is a mass agreement over is that the offensive approach and hitting approach has to change. They're all on board with that. And I think the fans are all on board with that. But Dave Van Horn is ultimately going to be the one that's in charge of adjusting and making it right. And since Dave Van Horn is literally one of the most well-respected and one of the greatest college baseball coaches of all time, I think he's going to get it done. I think he's going to make said adjustment because at the end of the day, he wants to win as badly as anybody. And at the end of the day, he has done tremendous at Arkansas where even though they haven't done as much as what they'd like to do in the postseason, there's not a coach that has had a more consistent regular season as far as being a national seed than Dave Van Horn. I mean, folks, if you really want to break it down, 18, 19, 21, 23, and 24. One of those seasons canceled due to the pandemic. The other one when Arkansas went to the World Series. Every one of those years, folks, Arkansas was a national seed. Okay? That's incredible success. I believe in Dave Van Horn. I believe he's going to get it done. I believe that this team is going to be a much better team, much improved team, and a better offense overall next year. Next year than what we saw this year. But because Arkansas has lost, and they lost in this fashion for the second year in a row, there is no longer going to be a benefit of the doubt going into the postseason next year. Arkansas could go undefeated. Undefeated, 30-0 in the SEC, win the SEC tournament, blowing everybody out, and not a single one of you are going to feel good about the postseason. Because I'm not. Because you're going to look back, well, we got bounced last year. Ooh, we got bounced the year before. In fact, the last 3 times that Arkansas has hosted regionals, it hadn't been great. Even in the regional they won, where they beat Nebraska, and that Troy Welch moment was awesome, it was a little bit of a struggle. And then it ended the next weekend against NC State. You got to start rewarding the fans for this. I know the fans don't get a whole lot of credit. People are mad and people are frustrated, and they're like, well, who cares about what the fans about winning? I agree. But the deal is that when you host regionals, you need to win. When you host supers, you need to win those. Because those are big. Those are ones that, and the reason you get rewarded and why everyone strives for that national seed is because you get to play in front of your home fans. And Arkansas just, for whatever reason, has not had it really going well for them when playing in front of their fans in postseason over the past few years. That has to change too. But my final say on this, and I want to be clear on all of it, I respect Dave Van Horn more than anybody. He is a guy that understands the game of college baseball. He is a pioneer. He is truly at his pinnacle right now, at his peak of college baseball coaching. There aren't many coaches out there like him. Yes, he's missing a College World Series title, we know. But he's as good as any coach out there, and he is good at not only winning, but also developing and putting guys into the pros. Dave Van Horn's resume speaks for itself, and I am not about to start questioning that or judging it or being overly critical of it. However, that doesn't mean that adjustments can be made. That doesn't mean you can't change. And that doesn't mean fans don't have a right to be disappointed after an early exit in the postseason once again. Yes, I know that the players are just as devastated, more devastated. Coaches too. Like, I know that. And it's not a pissing competition to try to figure out, well, who's more devastated? Who's sadder, the fans or the players? Like, that crap doesn't matter. What matters is that Coach Van Horn has so much, everything at his disposal to be able to win a title here at Arkansas. And he's been doing a good job of competing for one. But the next step has to be getting this offense going in the modern day of college baseball and getting it to a point to where it is not just improved from what it's been over the past few years, but being one of the better ones in the SEC. I know you can recruit. I know you put guys in the league. I know you do all these things. But if you're a Razorback fan and you're watching the SEC tournament in the postseason and you see a graphic pop up that shows that you are 11th, 12th, 13th in major statistical categories on hitting in an offense, that ain't it. That should never, ever happen at a place like Arkansas. Razorback baseball should never be that low in the SEC in any statistic, especially offense. Hitting. Pitching is what gets you to the next level. Pitching is what can put you apart once you get to Omaha, but you can't get to Omaha if you can't score. You can't advance in postseason if you can't tee off on a SEMO pitcher that's hitting his third day, that's throwing 60-mile-an-hour curveballs. You can't get to Omaha again unless you change it. I trust Dave will do it. I believe Dave will do it. It's just going to take time. Hopefully, not too much, though. Not too much. Sorry, Razorback fans. We're going to talk about that in a second. This past academic year, we need to break it down. It was really bad, and we'll talk about that coming up next.